blues that was funny. He played all kind of blues.
I really never heard the blues until I did go to, I had the pleasure of visiting Kansas City, which was in the very, very early days.
Basie's first visits to Kansas City in the mid-20s were with Katie Krippen's Oleo act in Hippity Hop, a burlesque show traveling out of New York City. He was interested in entertainment and later in playing stride piano, as Eastern Ragtime was known. On his next visit, with Gonzelle White's Big Jazz Jamboree, illness left him stranded. He took a job as an organist accompanying silent movies, and Kansas City became his new base of operation in 1927.
Kansas City was an open town, and it was a big attraction there for not only to good time seekers, but to musicians who played that type of music. And the featured music of Kansas City at that time was known as stomp, which is Western-style jazz, and was a way of playing the blues in up-tempo that on a beat, which Duke Ellington once described as the velocity of celebration.
I got a chance to wander over on 18th Street at that time was blazing. I mean, everything was happening there, beautiful. I mean, you could hear the blues from any window or door. I never seen anything like it.
Kansas City became a laboratory for music due to a demand for entertainment caused by the decision to ignore the nationwide prohibition outlawing alcohol. Some of this demand for music was met by local orchestras known as territory bands that operated out of every region of the country. Before long, Basie's ambitions began to focus on wanting to play music in this new style with one of the bands based in or passing through Kansas City. In 1928, he succeeded in joining Walter Page's Oklahoma City-based Blue Devils. Next, he talked his way into an orchestra led by Benny Moten as an arranger and second pianist. This was no small feat, as Moten himself was the band's pianist. And this was not only the most popular orchestra in town, but also seemed on the verge of national success.
When Basie went to Kansas City, he was essentially a stride-type piano player. When he came in touch with the riff style and the 4/4, he said, pull that together, pared it down, refined it, and that became the sort of center of his style. And he took it, in a sense, he was a vector which took it into the world at large from Kansas City.
During a temporary breakup of the Benny Moten Orchestra in 1935, he received his first billing as Count Basie, a title he gave himself, hoping to be associated with the royalty of jazz. The next year, after Moten's sudden death, Basie formed a group of his own. Saying once a Blue Devil, always a Blue Devil, he hired many of the Moten and Blue Devil musicians for his new orchestra.
Count Basie's band, introduced to the world in jazz as having two tenor saxophone, soloing in a big band.
And they was two of the best tenor players without a doubt in Kansas City. Although Benny Moten had some good musicians, but then any of them come up to Lester or Herschel.
Those two guys loved each other, but the public didn't know. They say they were coming to see a battle. And they really were coming to see a battle, I imagine, because the way they played, as if they were really battling for blood, really. And that's what really made two tenors in a band popular. And most bands started trying to have that.
Herschel were good friends, but people try to make out like they weren't. People would say they weren't good friends, but they were good friends. He paid his doctor bill, man. Prayers did. And Prez used to say, "We all right. He just love his horn and I love mine." Prez played with his horn all cocked up in the air, and I said, "Go on, blow, boy." Boy, he sure was playing.
The first performances of Count Basie and his Barons of Rhythm were at Kansas City's Reno Club, where they were regularly broadcast across the Western Plains.
K9XBY, I believe. They were so strong you could hear just as good here in New York as you could in Kansas City. It was real strong.
I'd turn on my little radio and listen to Count Basie. When I heard that name, I said, "Count Basie? How many different names they gonna put on music? Count Basie." Well, sir, they were stomping.
Another one impressed by these 1936 broadcasts was John Hammond, who was well on his way to becoming a legendary talent booster and record producer.
It was John Hammond's idea to enlarge the band and bring it to New York. We hit the road for some one-nighters, and we went from Kansas City to Chicago. And from there we took some more one-nighters coming on into the Rosen Ballroom in New York City. And after he got to New York, it was John Hammond's band to change the band. I think he'd also had promised some of his New York boys, first chance I get, I'll put you in one of my bands. Because 5 of us got a notice at one time. And I was one of the 5. And I was number 1 guitarist in the downbeat when I got my notice.
When I first sat down to play with that group, I had cold chills. I listened to Basie playing that piano and Walter Page and Joe Jones on those drums and Freddie Green on guitar, and I never heard such a reed section in my life.
This program of ultra-modern rhythms comes to you from the Savoy Ballroom, known as the home of Happy Feet, located in uptown New York City. Besides the music of Count Basie, the singing of Willie, Holiday, and James Rushing is heard here nightly.
I told Basie, I said, "You need a rousing trumpet player, man." And they were so surprised when people heard Sweets come out with the fan and the bell.
Yeah, the hat.
And bringing it, wow, 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 boy. He upset the people. The people hadn't heard that before.
It was in 1938.
Yeah, 38.
1938.
The orchestra from Kansas City was not an instant success, but with adjustments and a series of recordings, broadcasts, and bookings, their reputation grew.
This little place, nightclub on 52nd Street, was called the Famous Door. It was only big as a kitchen. No one ever knew how we all crammed in that one little spot to play, but it became the hottest spot on 52nd Street.
John Hammond and Willard Alexander, who had handled Basie's bookings for decades, maneuvered Basie into the Famous Door, where Hammond covered some of the costs. Thanks to its national radio broadcast, the Famous Door was literally the gateway to national and international renown. From there on, whatever Basie played was considered to have significant influence on the mainstream of jazz.
Jones
rehearsed this thing. See, everybody's got a version. Everybody swears that Sweets did it since he was the devil of the band. But Prez would do it because he was a sneaky one.
I used to think.
And Joe was above reproach, so he would do it. Well, we had rehearsed this, and the stage was supposed to be dark, and when we'd strike a match, then he'd start singing.
And I said, I struck a match in the dark.
And somebody struck a match and held the arrangement up and burned it up right on the stage. No. So it was, we had a lot of fun in the band, a lot of fun, you know.
Damn Joe Jones. Basie was just one of the guys. He wasn't like a leader, but yet everybody loved him, and he got all the respect in the world.
One thing I liked about Basie, he was always with the boys, you know. He liked to feel like he just, you know, never wanted to feel like I'm big boss and you this musician working for me, you know, like that.
Everybody loved him, and whatever he wanted, he knew how to get it. He could get some awful good effects. I've seen him sometime take 2 weeks before we got a tempo where he wanted it. He'd be trying to get that tempo. But when he found it, look out.
Everything became a Savoy ballroom where Basie played, you know? And the dancers, like the tap dancers, they would go crazy. Because Basie would play behind those tap dancers. And man, taps would be flying off of people's shoes and they'd be dancing their heels off. Basie would holler out there and say, what are you gonna do? A hot sock dance? Your heel is gone, your sole is gone off your shoes, you're gonna do this hot sock dance now, man. Those were the days where when you heard the Basie band, if you couldn't dance, you were dancing that night.
Attention everybody. Now here's a boogie woogie, solid beat. Come on you dancers, on your feet. The winners get surprised, as you all know, and we pick them by the speed and the class they show. Let's go!
If I have to look out in the audience and pick out two people or one person and play to that one person or whatever happens, that's strange enough to think. I mean, I do that sometimes. I'll work on that person or something like that, and if I finally can get him doing something else, I say,